Let's talk about trepanning or trepanation. Now, this is the oldest known surgical procedure, at least that we have evidence for. And what they would do is they would cut through the scalp, which would then expose the skull. Then they would drill, or unfortunately break through the skull in a lot of cases, to show this layer here, the dura mater. Now, this is just a bunch of connective tissue that surrounds the brain. The idea behind this procedure was to relieve pressure from the brain, and this was thought to cure a lot of diseases and ailments and even release demons. The thing is, we don't really use it for that anymore. These days, we perform trepanation if we want to stop bleeding. Let's say you have an epidural hematoma. So this is the dura, and then this is the skull. If you're bleeding between these two areas, that's obviously bad, so we would need to fix that. They also use trepanation for certain types of neurosurgeries. I want to talk about something called Chiari malformation. You see this? This is the cerebellum, and then right next to it is what's called the brainstem. Now, this little tiny bit of the cerebellum here is called a cerebellar tonsil. And in individuals with Chiari malformation, this can be longer than it's supposed to or bigger than it's supposed to, and it can put pressure on this structure here called the medulla oblongata. And it's responsible for things such as breathing. So when you put pressure against it, it can create many, many types of issues. You see, it can also block spinal fluid flow. So spinal fluid is created in this area here called the fourth ventricle, and then up here in the lateral ventricle. But it exits and bathes the spinal cord around this area. But if this cerebellar tonsil is too big, it can plug it up, and then you can get swelling on the brain called hydrocephalus. You see this area right here? This is on the inside of your knee, and it has the nickname Goosefoot because someone a long time ago decided that these three muscles all attaching at the same place looks like a goosefoot, or pezantherinus to be most accurate. This muscle right here is the rectus femoris, and it's one of 4 quadricep muscles, or the muscles on the front of your thigh, and it's gonna help move your hip as well as your knee, and also happens to be one of the biggest limiting factors for those learning how to do the front splits. But lucky for us, we have Christine Jones, the founder of mUvmethod here.
Hey, TikTok.
And she's gonna help my fellow anatomist, Jonathan Benyon.
A little bit nervous about what's about to happen here.
She's gonna help him learn how to stretch the rectus femoris.
All right, let's go into a low lunge, Jonathan. From here, lower your back knee down, reach your arm forward, up and back, reach back, catch a hold of your foot.
Oh, rectus femoris, yep.
Prepare your shoulders to the front of the room, and you want to take a few deep breaths here. This is one of many stretches we teach our students over at mUvmethod in order to help them progress in their splits.
If you needed to restore the airway on a patient, there is a whole list of things you would do before a tracheotomy. But this spot right here is where it's performed. So this is called the thyroid cartilage, and then this is called the cricoid cartilage. And just between them is a membrane called the cricothyroid membrane. And what they do is make an incision and then insert tubing, which they could then attach a ventilator to help restore breathing for that patient. This gigantic muscle right here is called the gluteus maximus, and just deep to it is another big one called the gluteus medius. Its job is to prevent you from falling side to side, but also to rotate your hip inwardly. Now, if you want to perform the front splits, you're going to want to turn it outwardly like this, meaning you need to stretch this muscle. Well, lucky for us, we have Christine Jones here from mUvmethod.
Hey, TikTok.
And she's going to teach my fellow anatomist, Jonathan Benyon,
Hi, gonna stretch those glutes.
how to stretch the glutes.
All right, Jonathan, let's come into a low lunge. From here, heel toe your right foot over to the left and lower into a half pigeon position.
Yep.
Yep, the glutes. Now go ahead and straighten your right leg, lift your hips in the air, hold here, and breathe. We teach our students this stretch along with many others in order to help them improve their flexibility and move farther into their splits.
Atrial fibrillation, also known as AFib, is one of the most common heart dysfunctions out there. So the heart has 4 chambers. We have these upper areas called the atria. So we have one right here and then another over on this side. And then we have these lower chambers called the ventricles. So normally what would happen is the atria would contract, and that would push blood down into the ventricles, which would then contract and then push blood upwardly. In AFib, what happens is the electrical signal starts on this left atrium, and that's not supposed to be the case. You see, when the heart beats, the signal starts in an area called the sinoatrial node here in the right atrium. So we have competing signals. We have an electric signal coming from this side and this side. So what happens is the heart gets confused and these atria start to spasm. And as it spasms, the entire heart essentially becomes confused, and then it doesn't pump blood properly. Breast cancer kills over 40,000 individuals in the United States alone every single year. That's why I wanted to show you what a tumor of the breast looks like underneath the skin. You see this yellowy tissue? That's adipose tissue or fat. This is the normal color of the breast tissue. But as we look over here, you can see this immediate discoloration from this tumor. At the same time, this tumor is kind of firm to the touch. Not all of them are, but many of them are. This is why you'll hear women are supposed to check their breasts frequently for these hardened lumps, because it can be a telltale sign of breast cancer. There are two different biceps in the body. One is in your arm and the other is in the back of the thigh in the hamstring group. This is the biceps femoris muscle. Biceps means two heads. Here's one head, and then there's a second one just behind it. This is the short head. So the action of biceps femoris is going to be to flex the knee as well as extend the hip. The thing is, it opposes the splits. Lucky for us, we have Christine Jones here, the founder of mUvmethod.
Hey, TikTok.
And she's going to teach Jonathan Benyon, my fellow anatomist,
How to stretch tight hamstrings.
how to stretch tight hamstrings.
So Jonathan, come into a low lunge. From here, lower your back knee down, straighten your right leg, and then toes to the ceiling.
Yep.
Hold here and breathe. Try to lengthen out your spine a little bit. Maybe not today, but eventually. This is one of many stretches we teach our students over at mUvmethod in order to help them create balance, flexibility, and move farther into their splits.
Whenever I show my students what the heart really looks like, they're always surprised by this yellow here for two reasons. One, it looks bigger than it's supposed to, right? We've all been told that the heart's about the size of your fist. And the second is, why is there so much fat? Well, this is normal. This is called the epicardial fat. And if you remove it, you then have a heart that is more or less the size of your fist. I want to go ahead and show you what's underneath this muscle here called the deltoid. And you're looking at the front of the shoulder right here. We can see the biceps brachii muscle, and we can even see part of pectoralis major coming in. And I want to see where these tendons go for biceps. So I'm going to grab the deltoid, and I'm going to go ahead and reflect it back. So this is what's underneath the front part of your shoulder. You can see the upper portion of the humerus. I can then grab pectoralis major and reflect that back as well. And now we can see these two tendons of biceps going up towards that upper humerus. Typically when someone breaks their ankle, they break one of the two spots. You see this that I'm pointing to with my thumb? That's called the medial malleolus. And then over here, this is the lateral malleolus. Now malleolus means hammer. So someone a long time ago thought that this and this looked like a hammer. They belong to larger bones. This thicker bone is the tibia, and the thinner bone is the fibula. But you can kind of see how they kind of hang off the side here. So if you were to roll your ankle one way or the other, you could snap and break the bone in either spot. Your fingerprints developed very early on in the first trimester when you were still inside of your mother's womb. You see all those little swirls? Those are called friction ridges. And they developed due to a very specific set of circumstances that we all encountered inside of our mothers. You see, when you were about an inch or so long, you were pressing on the uterus, pressing on the placenta, and then also there was pressure from the amniotic fluid, and all of that was interacting with the skin, and it started to create these specific friction ridges. Now, the best we can tell, each one of us has a unique set, but hey, no one's ever seen all of them, so it's actually impossible to know for sure. The femur is the longest, largest, and strongest bone in the human body. It's capable of handling up to 6,000 pounds of compressive forces before it snaps, making it very unlikely to break, but definitely not impossible. You have hollow spaces inside of your brain. You see this right here? This is called the lateral ventricle. And then this triangular shaped portion here is called the fourth ventricle. Now normally inside of there would be filled with cerebrospinal fluid. And that fluid is created in these spaces. Eventually it leaves these spaces and then bathes and surrounds the brain, and your whole brain is then floating inside of your skull. So what you're looking at here is the front of the thigh, and we can see the quadriceps, and on the side here we can even see another group called the adductors. And if we look closely, we can see a specific adductor called adductor longus. And one of its jobs is going to bring the hip forward into what we call flexion, meaning it opposes the splits. Luckily for us, we have Christine Jones here, the founder of mUvmethod.
Hey, TikTok.
And she's going to teach my fellow anatomist, Jonathan Benyon,
Here to conquer the middle splits.
how to stretch the adductor longus.
All right, Jonathan, take your legs out to the side. So this is called straddles. Toes to the ceiling, and then go ahead and walk yourself forward. Lower down to your forearms, your belly, whatever the range allows for. So this is another stretch we do over at mUvmethod to help our students improve their hip flexibility, mobility, and of course, get into the splits.
So I want to show you just how thin bone can get in the skull. So as I lift this up to the light, you're going to see that light just starts pushing and emerging through all the different nooks and crannies of the skull. You can see how thin that temporal bone can be. And as we look towards the back, even the occipital bone can start to really thin out towards that bottom aspect. You are like an onion, and I can prove it to you. So right here is going to be the front of your belly, or the rectus abdominis muscle, but on the side we can see these muscles here called the obliques. Now look at its fibers. You see how it's going in this direction? Watch this. Now, the fibers are going in the perpendicular direction. These are two separate oblique muscles, but there's even a third one. Look at that. You see these fibers? They're going across. So we have the transversus abdominis, the internal oblique, with the external oblique. But you are indeed like an onion. You see this thing right here? This is called your pituitary gland. Now this is going to secrete a variety of different hormones. Now if we could picture a tumor growing inside of this gland, that could cause the gland to secrete too much of one or more of those hormones. Now the most popular hormone everyone knows is growth hormone. So if we had a tumor that caused too much growth hormone to be secreted, you could get what's called acromegaly or possibly even gigantism. You see this hole right here on the side of the skull? This is called the external acoustic meatus, or the auditory canal, or maybe you just say ear hole. But you can kind of picture that there's this floppy cartilaginous bit on the outside called the external ear that's going to funnel all the sound through and into the inner structures. And this is the crazy part. My voice that's coming from the phone right now that you're holding, everything is being processed in just this tiny little inch or so long space where we find the middle and inner ear. And then you see that hole right there? That's where the vestibulocochlear nerve exits to then go to the brain and process all of the sound. I want to show you just how deep hairs can penetrate into the layers of the skin. So you're seeing the hairs emerge from the epidermis. And if I turn it to the side, we can also see just how thick the skin is. But as I flip it over, you can see these hairs as they penetrate deep into the fatty layer. Yet they also are going to stop, because if they continued much farther than this, they would eventually start hitting bone. The sound of the Achilles tendon rupturing has been described as a cracking whip or even a firearm going off. The reason why is because this gigantic tendon here, the Achilles, is under an extraordinary amount of tension. It supports the weight of your entire upper body to move the bones of the foot as you're walking, running, jumping, you name it. And this particular cadaver even had an Achilles injury at some point in their lifetime. This gray portion here, that's scar tissue. I can't say to what extent their injury was, but it probably didn't feel all that well. In fact, we just filmed an entire YouTube video that goes over the differences between calf strains and Achilles ruptures to get to the bottom of a big sports question. Did Kevin Durant's calf injury make him more susceptible to his eventual Achilles injury? If you're interested, why don't you go ahead and swipe on over to our profile and find the video now. A cleft palate happens when this line right here fails to fuse. You see, this is the fusion point between two different bones called the maxilla bones. We have one right here, then we have another right here, and they will normally fuse. And you can see this fusion point also runs down the center of the roof of the mouth. Now, if they fail to fuse, that means you have an abnormal passageway between the nasal cavity and the oral cavity. And that's bad because food and drink can then go up into the nasal cavity where it does not belong. I want to show you a structure that a lot of people feel is useless. See this thing right here? This is the appendix. Now, this tiny little appendix used to be, if we rewound the clock a long time ago, used to be something very similar to a second stomach. So you see this is your first and only stomach for us now, but a long time ago there used to be a second stomach. So as digested material would make its way through the intestines, it would get a second acid bath down here. But as we evolved, this didn't really need to be there anymore, so it dwindled away, and all that's left is this tiny little appendix. Now, people get it frequently removed, and then they don't really have a greater effect on their body, which is why a lot of people think it's useless. But data's still coming in, and there's a lot of cool stuff that we're still discovering about this tiny little appendage. Now, we went ahead and filmed an entire video all about the appendix, so if you're interested, swipe on over to our bio page, go to YouTube, and see it now. The tongue is absolutely enormous. You see, this isn't just one muscle, it's several different muscles. Now, just look at how big this is in relation to, say, this is the chin right here. This is part of the mandible. We can also see part of the roof of the mouth or your hard palate. I mean, this gigantic structure here is the tongue, and it's just taking up the entirety of your oral cavity. You see this thing right here? This is called a condyle, and we have another one here on the femur. So we have a medial and a lateral condyle. Condyle just means knuckle, and as we look at it from this side, that makes a lot of sense. Now, condyles are very common in the body because their rounded, smooth surface allows for efficient rotation. This right here is skin from an eyelid. Now, if you look really closely, you're gonna see wrinkles. Now, wrinkles happen due to a variety of different reasons, including the position you sleep at night. So maybe you might wanna rethink that super comfortable position where your face is smashed in the pillow. But these wrinkles are more like age wrinkles. And those happen because the collagen fibers, which are in the second layer down called the dermis, don't get replaced properly, or they get damaged due to sunlight or even possibly your diet. Endometriosis affects up to 10% of the female population, and it's still largely mysterious. What we do know about it is that the inner lining of the uterus, that's what this is right here, is called the endometrium, and we find tissue like it or it itself distributed throughout the pelvic cavity, and it can be on top of ovaries like this one, or on a uterine tube like this. We can even find it over here on the bladder itself. But the fact is, we are not 100% sure what causes it. We do know that it can create extremely painful menstrual cramps as well as infertility. Now, if you're interested to know more, I filmed an entire YouTube video all about endometriosis. So go ahead and swipe on over and check it out now. This right here is part of the birth canal. Picture how amazing this is. A full-term fetus spinning and inverting and then going through this area to be born. It is absolutely incredible. I want to show you guys something that is still to this day a mystery to science. So you see this is the greater omentum. It's just a fat apron that drapes over the intestines, and I can reflect that back. And then we see the small intestines here. And if I slide those to the side, what we see are these little droplets here. These are called omental appendices. Now, it's not a mystery that what they're made of. They're made of fat, essentially. But it's still a mystery as to why they take this shape. They're like these little droplets, and you can see them just kind of dangling off of the colon here. We have no idea why they take this form. We know what they are, we know what they do, we just don't know why they are and why they do.